Let's tell a story. Imagine a sunny street, birds singing, and Mr. Thompson sitting on his porch. Our story is about him. He's not just any old man. Mr. Thompson is a hero. He fought for our country a long, long time ago. He's a war veteran. Now he's old, but everyone in town still respects him a lot. They know he's seen a lot and done a lot for them. He always wears his special hat that shows he was in the war. This story will show how even heroes can face bad things. Even though he's old and respected, some people will treat him unfairly. It's a story about how someone strong stands up for what's right. His son will come in and fight. It will take about 35 minutes to tell this story. It shows that even in dark times, hope and family can help. Mr. Thompson wasn't just sitting on any porch. It was a wide, wooden porch painted white with a swing hanging from the ceiling. The porch faced the street, but it was set back a little with a small garden in front. Red and yellow flowers bloomed brightly and a little birdbath sat in the middle, full of water. Mr. Thompson loved watching the birds come and go. He sat in his favorite rocking chair that would worn smooth from years of use. He wore his usual outfit, a blue shirt, khaki pants, and of course, his veteran's cap. The sun warmed his face and he closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Children laughing, cars driving by, and the gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. It was a peaceful scene. He felt content. Little did he know that peace was about to be broken. A storm was brewing and it was heading straight for his porch. The black and white police car pulled up to the curb, breaking the peaceful rhythm of the street. Two officers stepped out. Officer Miller was tall and broad, with a stern face and a swagger in his step. He adjusted his belt, his eyes scanning the street with a sense of authority. Officer Jones was younger, more hesitant. He seemed uncomfortable, glancing around nervously as he followed Officer Miller toward Mr. Thompson's porch. Officer Miller had a reputation. Some whispered he was quick to judge, especially people who didn't look like him. Officer Jones was new to the force, trying to learn the ropes, but he had a good heart. He wanted to do what was right, but he wasn't sure how to stand up to Officer Miller. The contrast between them was stark, and it was clear who was in charge. As they walked toward Mr. Thompson, the peaceful afternoon began to feel heavy with tension. Officer Miller stopped at the foot of Mr. Thompson's porch steps, his shadow falling across the old man. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice loud and sharp. "We've received a complaint about loitering." Mr. Thompson looked up, startled. "Loitering? On my own porch? I live here, officer." He pointed to the house behind him. "Been living here for 50 years. Officer Miller smirked. "That may be, but we still got a complaint. Someone said you were causing a disturbance." Officer Jones shifted uncomfortably, looking around at the quiet street. There was no disturbance, only the gentle sounds of a peaceful afternoon. He opened his mouth to say something, but Officer Miller shot him a warning glance. "I haven't caused any trouble," Mr. Thompson said calmly. "I'm just enjoying the sunshine." He gestured to his garden. "Been tending to my flowers." Officer Miller wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. "I'm going to need to see some identification, Mr. Thompson." His tone was accusatory and the situation was quickly turning sour. Mr. Thompson sighed, his hands gripping the arms of his rocking chair. "Officer, I've lived in this town my whole life. Everyone knows me. I haven't done anything wrong." He kept his voice steady, refusing to be intimidated. "I know my rights. I'm on my property." "Rights?" Officer Miller chuckled. A harsh, unpleasant sound. "Let me tell you about rights, old man. Rights are what I say they are." He stepped closer, invading Mr. Thompson's personal space. Officer Jones winced. This was going too far. He knew Mr. Thompson. He knew he was a good man. He cleared his throat, trying to interject, but Officer Miller silenced him with another sharp look. "I'm not doing anything illegal," Mr. Thompson repeated, his voice firm but calm. "I deserve to sit on my own porch in peace." He looked Officer Miller directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. He would not back down. He had faced worse in war. This bully wouldn't scare him. Officer Miller's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you, old-timer?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Maybe you think because you wore that little hat you're special. But out here, you're just another nuisance." He used a hateful slur, a word that cut through the air like a shard of glass. Mr. Thompson flinched, not from fear, but from the sting of the word. He had heard that word before many times in his life. But it still hurt, especially coming from someone who was supposed to protect and serve. Officer Jones gasped, his eyes widening in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. He looked around, hoping no one else had heard, but he knew it was too late. The air was thick with hate, and the damage was done. Officer Miller continued his tirade, spewing more hateful words, each one a blow to Mr. Thompson's dignity. The sunny afternoon had turned dark, poisoned by prejudice and hate. The peace was shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of racism. Officer Miller took another step closer, his face inches from Mr. Thompson's. Mr. Thompson could smell the officer's harsh cologne and see the anger burning in his eyes. "You gonna resist, old man?" Officer Miller taunted, his hand resting on his weapon. He was trying to provoke Mr. Thompson to give himself an excuse to use force. Mr. Thompson remained seated, his hands still gripping the arms of his chair. He refused to give Officer Miller the satisfaction of seeing him scared. He knew that any sudden movement, any sign of resistance would be used against him. He had learned that lesson a long time ago. Officer Jones shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his unease growing. He knew this was wrong. He could feel it in his gut. But he was paralyzed by fear, afraid of what Officer Miller would do if he intervened. He was trapped between his conscience and his loyalty to his partner. The tension was unbearable. Mr. Thompson was trapped too. Trapped by hate. Officer Jones opened his mouth again, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. He was frozen, watching a nightmare unfold. He knew what was coming next. He had seen it before. Officer Miller, seeing that Mr. Thompson wouldn't break, smirked. He reached for his belt, his fingers brushing against the pepper spray canister. "All right, old man," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like you're not going to cooperate. That's your choice." Mr. Thompson's eyes widened slightly. He knew what pepper spray could do. He had seen it used in the army. It was a weapon designed to incapacitate. He braced himself, knowing he couldn't escape. He was trapped in his chair, on his own porch, at the mercy of a hateful man with a badge. The sunny afternoon felt like a distant memory. All that was left was fear and the metallic scent of impending violence. The world seemed to slow down. With a swift motion, Officer Miller aimed the pepper spray directly at Mr. Thompson's face. Officer Jones flinched, turning his head away for a split second, unable to watch. He wanted to shout to stop him, but the words caught in his throat. He was paralyzed by a mix of fear and the ingrained respect for authority that had been drilled into him during his training. He told himself that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be that bad. Maybe it would just be a quick burst, enough to get Mr. Thompson to cooperate. He knew he was lying to himself. He knew that Officer Miller enjoyed this. He had seen it in his eyes. He looked back just as Officer Miller squeezed the trigger. A cloud of orange mist erupted from the canister, engulfing Mr. Thompson's face. Officer Jones squeezed his eyes shut, a wave of guilt washing over him. He was complicit. He had allowed this to happen. He was no better than Officer Miller. The sound of Mr. Thompson's cough filled the air, a stark reminder of his failure. The pepper spray hit Mr. Thompson with full force. His eyes burned, his throat constricted, and he gasped for air, but only managed to cough. Saliva and tears streamed down his face, mixing with the orange residue. He clawed at his eyes, trying to relieve the burning sensation, but it only made it worse. He was completely disoriented, unable to see or breathe properly. He slumped forward in his rocking chair, his body racked with sobs. The pain was intense, almost unbearable. He felt helpless, humiliated, and terrified. He was a war veteran, a man who had faced death and destruction, but this was different. This was an act of pure, unadulterated hate. Officer Miller watched with a cold satisfaction, his face devoid of any empathy. He had achieved his goal, he had broken Mr. Thompson. Officer Jones remained frozen, his face pale and his body trembling. He could hear Mr. Thompson's desperate gasps for air, and the sound was like a knife twisting in his gut. He had to do something. He had to stop this. But he was still too afraid. Mr. Thompson coughed and choked, his body convulsing. He tried to wipe his eyes, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely touch his face. He stumbled to his feet, his vision blurred, and almost fell off the porch. He grabbed the railing for support, his knuckles white. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe, and he was in excruciating pain. He felt a wave of nausea and vomited onto the porch, the acrid smell mixing with the pepper spray. He was helpless, completely at the mercy of Officer Miller. He wondered if this was how it would end, on his own porch, blinded and choking, a victim of hate. Officer Miller chuckled, enjoying Mr. Thompson's suffering. "That'll teach you to disrespect the law," he sneered. He took a step back, satisfied with the damage he had inflicted. He had shown Mr. Thompson who was in charge. He had shown him his place. But he was wrong. Someone was coming. Someone who wouldn't stand for this. Someone who loved Mr. Thompson more than anything in the world. And he was close. Very close. A truck roared down the street, tires screeching as it came to a sudden halt in front of Mr. Thompson's house. The door swung open and David, Mr. Thompson's son, jumped out. He was a big man with broad shoulders and a muscular build. His face was etched with concern as he rushed towards the porch. He had seen the police car and had a bad feeling. He took in the scene in an instant. His father, slumped against the railing, coughing and gasping, his face covered in orange residue, Officer Miller standing nearby, smirking, and Officer Jones, looking pale and shaken. His blood ran cold. "Dad," he yelled, his voice filled with panic. He vaulted over the porch steps, ignoring the pain in his knees. He knelt beside his father, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew exactly what had happened. He had heard stories about Officer Miller. He had always feared something like this would happen. Now his worst nightmare had come true. And Officer Miller was about to face the consequences. David gently helped his father sit back in the rocking chair, his eyes blazing with anger as he turned to face Officer Miller. "What did you do to him?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He knew the answer, but he wanted to hear it from Miller's own mouth. Officer Miller smirked, his confidence unshaken. He was resisting arrest, he said, his voice laced with arrogance. He wouldn't cooperate. David's fists clenched. "Resisting arrest? My father? He can barely walk. You sprayed an old man in the face for no reason." He took a step closer, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Officer Miller. Officer Jones finally found his voice. "David, please," he said, his voice trembling. "Let's just calm down. We can sort this out." David ignored him, his focus solely on Officer Miller. "You're a disgrace," he said, his voice filled with contempt. "You're supposed to protect people, not abuse them. Especially not someone who served this country." The air crackled with tension. A storm was brewing, and this time Officer Miller was about to be caught in the downpour. Officer Miller puffed out his chest, trying to appear unfazed by David's anger. "I don't have to explain myself to you," he sneered. "Just take care of your old man and stay out of my way." He thought he could intimidate David, but he was wrong. He didn't know who he was dealing with. David's eyes narrowed. He saw the lingering cloud of pepper spray in the air, the orange residue on his father's face, the fear in his eyes. He knew, without a doubt, that Officer Miller was lying. He hadn't resisted. He had been attacked. And the rage that had been simmering inside him finally boiled over. But David was smart. He knew that reacting violently would only make things worse for his father. He took a deep breath, trying to control his anger. He had to think clearly. He had to find a way to get justice for his father without putting him in further danger. This was going to take more than just brute force. It was going to take strategy. And David was ready to play the game. "Resisting arrest?" David repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "He's an old man sitting on his own porch. What law did he break? What crime did he commit?" He gestured to his father, who was still coughing and gasping for air. "Look at him. Does he look like a threat to you?" Officer Miller crossed his arms, his face hardening. He was being uncooperative. He refused to provide identification. He stuck to his story even though he knew it was a lie. He couldn't back down now. His reputation was on the line. "Identification?" David scoffed. "Everyone in this town knows my father. He's lived here for 50 years. You didn't need identification. You just wanted to harass him. You wanted to show him who's boss." He paused, his eyes locking onto Officer Miller's. "Well, guess what? You messed with the wrong family." He stepped closer to Miller again. Officer Jones started to speak, but David cut him off. "Not now, Officer Jones. This is between me and him." David wanted to make sure Officer Miller knew he was the only one accountable for what he had done. Officer Miller sneered, his eyes filled with disdain. "Your father has always been a problem. He thinks he's better than everyone else. Thinks he's entitled to special treatment." He paused, his voice dripping with venom. "Maybe this will teach him a lesson. Maybe this will finally shut him up." David's jaw tightened. He knew that Miller's words were fueled by prejudice, by a deep-seated hatred that had festered for years. He could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. But he wouldn't let Miller get to him. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "You're pathetic," David said, his voice calm but firm. "You abuse your power to harass innocent people. You hide behind your badge and your uniform, thinking you're untouchable. But you're not. The world is changing, Officer Miller. And people like you are going to be held accountable for your actions. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police, he said calmly. I'm reporting an assault. Miller's face turned ashen. He realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. David wasn't afraid of him, and he wasn't going to back down. As David dialed 911, Officer Jones stepped forward, his face etched with concern. David, maybe we can handle this internally, he said, his voice pleading. I'm sure we can reach some kind of understanding. He glanced nervously at Officer Miller, who remained silent, his face a mask of anger and apprehension. David ignored him, continuing to speak to the 911 operator, calmly reporting the assault and providing his father's address. He knew that involving the authorities was the right thing to do, even if it meant more scrutiny and potential backlash. He couldn't let Officer Miller get away with this. He finished the call and looked at Officer Jones, his expression unreadable. There's nothing to understand, Officer Jones. Your partner assaulted my father. He needs to be held accountable. He looked back at his father, wiping the tears from his face. It's going to be all right, Dad, he said softly. I promise. He would make sure of it. The old veteran had suffered enough. Officer Jones looked at David, then at Mr. Thompson, and finally at Officer Miller. He saw the fear in the old man's eyes, the anger in David's, and the cold indifference in Miller's. He knew that David was right. Miller had gone too far. He had crossed a line. The excuses he had been making for Miller started to crumble. He couldn't justify what had happened, not anymore. He had joined the police force to protect people, to serve his community, not to stand by and watch while innocent people were victimized. A flicker of defiance ignited within him. He couldn't stay silent any longer. He had to do something. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. Miller, he said, his gaze fixed on his partner. Maybe we should just go. It was a small step, but it was a start. He had finally broken free from the fear that had held him captive for so long. It was time to do the right thing. The guilt he felt was now a powerful force urging him to act. Did anyone see what happened? David called out, his voice loud and clear. Did anyone witness this officer attack my father? Several neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. They had heard the shouting, seen the police car, and sensed that something was wrong. David pointed his phone at Officer Miller, the camera rolling. State your name and badge number, officer, he said, his voice calm but firm. And explain why you felt it was necessary to use pepper spray on an elderly man sitting on his own porch. Officer Miller glared at the phone, his face flushed with anger. He refused to answer, his lips pressed into a thin line. He knew he was being recorded, and that this video could be used against him. But he couldn't bring himself to apologize, to admit that he was wrong. His pride wouldn't allow it. He just stood there, silent and seething, as David continued to record. The weight of the evidence was mounting against him. The tide was turning. He didn't do anything wrong, Mrs. Henderson shouted from across the street. Mr. Thompson is a good man. He's a war hero. That officer is always harassing people, Mr. Johnson added, shaking his head in disgust. He's been doing this for years. It's a disgrace, another neighbor exclaimed. Spraying an old man like that. He should be ashamed of himself. More and more neighbors gathered, their voices rising in anger and indignation. They had all witnessed Officer Miller's behavior, and they were fed up. They knew Mr. Thompson. They respected him. And they wouldn't stand for him being treated this way. Officer Miller's face grew even redder. He realized that he had lost control of the situation. The community was turning against him. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. His carefully constructed facade of authority was crumbling before his eyes. The video on David's phone, combined with the neighbor's outrage, was a powerful weapon, and it was pointed directly at him. He looked at Officer Jones. He needed help. Now. Officer Miller shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting from the phone to the crowd to Officer Jones. Sweat trickled down his forehead and his hands began to tremble. He could feel the pressure mounting, the walls closing in. He tried to maintain his composure, but his voice wavered when he spoke. I was just doing my job, he stammered, his words sounding hollow and unconvincing. He wasn't cooperating. The neighbors scoffed, their disbelief palpable. That's a lie, one of them shouted. He was just sitting there. You attacked him for no reason. Yeah, Miller, another neighbor yelled. We all know you've got a problem with people who don't look like you. Officer Miller's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under the weight of the truth. He was exposed, vulnerable, and desperately trying to regain control. He knew that if he didn't do something soon, his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for would be lost. He looked at David, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. He had to find a way out of this mess. Now, while continuing to record, David gently guided his father back to his rocking chair. He grabbed a bottle of water from the porch and helped Mr. Thompson rinse his face, carefully avoiding his eyes. "Just breathe, Dad," he said softly. "It's going to be okay." He looked up at the neighbors, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you all for coming out," he said. "Your support means a lot to my family. I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this officer is held accountable for what he did." He turned his attention back to Officer Miller, the camera still rolling. "You can leave now, officer," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "Your services are no longer required. In fact, I think it's best if you never come near my family again." He continued to record, capturing every moment, every word, every expression. He wanted to make sure there was a record of everything that had happened, a record that couldn't be erased or denied. He was protecting his father, and he was protecting his community. He was making sure that justice would be served. Officer Jones took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. "Miller," he said, I don't think this was handled correctly." He avoided eye contact with David, his gaze fixed on the ground. I think we used excessive force." Officer Miller shot him a look of disbelief, his eyes filled with fury. "What are you saying, Jones?" he hissed. "Are you siding with them?" Officer Jones swallowed hard, his hands trembling. He knew he was risking his career, his reputation, everything, but he couldn't stay silent any longer. He had to speak the truth. I'm saying we should leave," he stammered. "I'm saying we should go now." He looked at David, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I should have done something. I should have stopped him." It was too little, too late, but it was a start. He had finally found his voice. He had finally chosen the right side. He hoped it wasn't too late to make amends. Officer Miller glared at Officer Jones, his eyes filled with contempt. He knew his career was on the line, and he blamed Jones for it. But he also knew that he couldn't win this fight. Not with the crowd, not with the recording, and not with Jones turning against him. He reluctantly turned to leave, his face a mask of anger and resentment. But before he could go, he turned back to David, his eyes filled with malice. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You and your old man are going to regret this. You haven't heard the last of me." He spat on the ground and stormed towards the police car, Officer Jones following close behind, his head hung low. The crowd watched them go, their faces a mixture of anger and relief. The immediate threat was gone, but the damage had been done. And the fight for justice was just beginning. The police car pulled away, leaving behind a silence that was heavy with unspoken words and unresolved tension. The neighbors surged forward, offering words of comfort and support to Mr. Thompson and David. Mrs. Henderson brought a cool compress for Mr. Thompson's eyes, while Mr. Johnson offered to call a doctor. Others offered to stay with Mr. Thompson while David went to the police station to file a formal complaint. "We're all here for you, Mr. Thompson," one of the neighbors said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We won't let him get away with this. He's been bullying people in this neighborhood for too long," another neighbor added. "It's time someone put a stop to it." David felt a surge of gratitude for the outpouring of support. He knew that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had the entire community behind him. He looked at his father, who was still shaken but slowly recovering. He knew that with their help, they would get justice for what had happened. He squeezed his father's hand. The community had transformed from a peaceful afternoon setting to a united front against injustice. David stood tall, his voice ringing with determination. "I'm not going to let this go," he declared. "I'm going to file a formal complaint with the police department, and I'm going to pursue legal action against Officer Miller and the department for their racist abuse of power." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of his neighbors. "This isn't just about my father," he said. "It's about protecting our community from officers like Miller who abuse their authority and target innocent people because of their race." He looked at his father, his heart filled with love and respect. "I owe it to my father, and I owe it to all of you to fight for justice," he said. "I'm not going to rest until Officer Miller is held accountable for his actions and until we make sure that this never happens again." He vowed to fight for what was right, knowing that this would be a long and difficult battle. But he was ready, and he knew that he wasn't alone. He had the support of his family, his friends, and his entire community. And that was all he needed. The wheels of justice would turn, however slow. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street. The neighbors slowly dispersed, offering final words of encouragement and support. David helped his father into the house, his arm wrapped protectively around his shoulders. Mr. Thompson sat in his favorite chair, his face still red and blotchy from the pepper spray. He was quiet, his eyes filled with a sadness that David had never seen before. He was physically recovering, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. The experience had shaken him to his core. He had fought for his country, defended its values, and believed in its promise of equality and justice. But now he had been betrayed by someone who was sworn to uphold those values. He had been targeted because of the color of his skin. The racism was something he hadn't expected to encounter so directly in his own home, in his own community. David sat beside his father, his hand resting on his arm. He knew that he couldn't erase what had happened, but he could offer his love and support. He could promise his father that he would fight for justice, that he would make sure that Officer Miller was held accountable for his actions. And he would. He had to. For his father, for his community, and for himself. The battle against racism and police brutality was far from over, and it left lasting wounds.